All right, so this week we're going to talk about servers and apps, mostly talking about servers, and specifically we're going to be focused on sort of the nouns of that, the things of the internet. Because even though the internet can feel ethereal and like it's all around you in all these different ways, it definitely still has some physical infrastructure that's important to understand on a basic level if you're going to build programs and projects and applications that work on the internet. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We were just, and I want to make sure it gets in the recording, but there's like a physical cable that connects the internet around the world, and usually many copies. There's a big hub in New York City, and lots of the big financial trading companies buy buildings or floors of buildings really close to where that happens. There's also one that comes in San Francisco, and in the same way, there's companies that buy up land right near there, because you get faster internet connections by like nanoseconds if you're right next to it. It's fascinating. But we're going to talk about some of that infrastructure. So our goal for this week is to, first up, try and in 2 slides describe how the internet works. Then we're going to build some context about how that applies to you as a maker. And then we're going to talk about how do you interface with servers. And then we're going to talk about first actions with a server at MakeHaven. And I'm right now realizing I'm going to need to supplement those first actions with a server at MakeHaven with a few items that I need to patch in. So we will get to that. But first up, how the internet works in a nutshell. And this is very much just a summary of the internet. It is in no way even coming close to describing the whole thing. It really is just a connection of computers. If you're just trying to visit a web page, just like a simple, I would like to go to skittles.com, you are going to ask your browser to go to that web page by some URL. So skittles.com is a human readable URL. It takes you to a thing, but basically skittles.com has got nothing useful behind it. You send that as a request to a domain name server. A domain name server knows what Skittles maps to in terms of numbers for IP address. It forwards along any request that you made to the website. Then that server processes the request. It maybe even builds the page in real time. Like if you're going shopping online, usually if you're trying to buy a product, those pages get built in the instant that you try and go to the page from a database of information. And so it builds that information. Then the files are sent to you. Your browser will read what's in the files, build a website to go along with it. And then if you want, JavaScript can keep that connection alive even longer so that you can get there. But all of this happens in milliseconds, like less than 100 milliseconds for you to get to pretty much any web page that's worth its time. And load times are definitely a way that websites are ranked. So companies try their very hardest to get those load times as low as possible. So there's a lot of interesting infrastructure, but it really is a whole collection. So in here, I tried to color code a little bit. This is maybe you, the computer user. You put a request to a DNS, it goes to a server. That might reach out to an API for some information. It might reach out to a database somewhere else in the world and come back. And this is deliberately messy so that we're clear. It is a complex web of things that it takes in order for all of this to come cycling back around to you. And there's hours and hours and hours of video that you could watch to understand just this part of the internet and how it works and how things get deployed. But basically, if I were to try and summarize the internet, is S and the DNS, that's a server. That's a domain name server. And so it specifically is the type of server that knows how to go from the name of a website like MakeHaven.org to the IP address where the computer is that holds all those files for MakeHaven.org. So a domain name server is usually, and like Google has a big one and there's a few others, but it's just another type of server. Yep. And so let's see, let's click back into here. And so essentially, I would say the internet overall is something that comes from a collection of all those servers, which are really just computers. They have public or limited access. But I would describe the internet as we know it today in 2021 as more of an emergent property from all those computers giving us little things. Lots of people solving tiny problems about the internet that have accumulated into the experience that now gives us TikTok, or lets us shop online, or that you can order a car that you can ask for a car to come pick you up and take you to anywhere you want to go. All of those things are a collection of the work that people have put in over decades, so that, you know, somebody figured out a little JavaScript here, somebody figured out how to run a server over there to build a website that hosts pages on the fly. There's a lot of different pieces that all come together to make this possible. And I would really describe the current modern internet as an emergent property from those things. Sort of like, you know, I've heard consciousness described as an emergent property. Like, there's a lot of different weird ways that you can describe. And I don't want to get, you know, it's obviously not anything that is that hard, but it's something that feels more than any one of the parts. So more than any one server, the internet is a lot of those pieces put together that gives us the experience that we have. So it's a whole collection of those that are really more together than they are separate. So the internet, you know, there's no way we're going to fully describe it, but to get a little context, the main thing is, if we're going to imagine the internet's a collection of servers, the big game for you is, how do you run a server? How do you set up a server? And the shortest version I've got for you is with VS Code. So lots of you have been writing web pages or websites with many different formats, but VS Code is one that was early on. We talked about its value. And so there's some really simple pages you can build. Here's a page I was working on recently. I want to build a tide chart that's accurate and up to date. I'm getting closer. And so I've been building that in VS Code. And as I do, I use this little extension called Live Server that is a Node.js server that's based around VS Code. When you click the button, it makes a tiny server so that I can look at the page. Anytime I save the code, I can look at the website right there on the computer. And we can fire this up a little bit later just to show you that it works. But what's really neat about this one is that it's a server that's not only locally on your computer, but any computer on your network can check that out also. So I could, you know, I was just, for the sake of testing it, you can do Live Server, and then on my Wi-Fi at home, while I had one computer running with Live Server, I could pull up the website on my phone. So it's a very small, very temporary server thing, but it's totally a way to serve a website on your local network. And it's totally circling all the way back to weeks 1 and 2 to bring that back. We're connecting those dots as we bring these all into connection. So it's going to feel like a long time ago that we did that. And you don't need to remember all those details by any stretch, but it's just good to see that a server it's not necessarily a faraway idea. It can be the computer that's sitting right in front of you that you're using right now. Even if that's a cell phone, you can use it as a server for a web page. So that said, that's the simplest way, I think, to get a server. But for lots and lots of people, lots of the time, a server is something that runs on Linux, which is worth having its own description. I would say that, well, I think if I were to just hedge a bet, if you included everything that connects to the internet that has a real full operating system, I think that most of them would be Linux. Even though I'm on a Windows computer, you might be on a Mac. I don't think anyone in the class's daily driver is a Linux computer, but I think that probably the majority of things out there on the internet are Linux machines. And so anything that's a Chrome OS is based on Linux, Android is based on Linux. It's just another operating system that's free and open source. Linus Torvalds is sort of the spirit of that, the embodiment of it, and Tux the Penguin is the mascot. But Linux is its own operating system that is really well designed in many ways, but it really works well as a server. And so it's a good way to build some things out. Now, if you've ever heard of Ubuntu, and I hope I'm saying that right, Ubuntu is a really full-featured Linux distribution, so that's a nice way to play around with Linux. And so instead of having Mac or Windows, Linux is just the third option. And then you can also have a few different ways to like build a desktop. You can use a Raspberry Pi with Debian. There's a few different versions of what's going on, but Ubuntu is the way to, yeah, Ubuntu, yeah, that's it. I need to make sure that I try and say it correctly. But it's all about community and bringing that together. So there's a ton of different interesting things, and Linux has lots of different versions that look very different. So these are all different versions of Linux that are on screen now, different ways that it can look. And as we describe Linux as an operating system that we'll play around with a little bit this week, because it's just at the core of many servers, it's one to remember that it doesn't have a key look. Windows and Mac go to a lot of effort to make sure that their branding is nice and solid. So a Windows machine looks like a Windows machine. And you can tell if it's older or if it's newer, but you can also spot that it's Windows. It probably has a bar across the top. You hit the Windows key and up pops the start menu. Those are really consistent things across Windows. Mac has its bar across the top, right? Those are key landmark pieces that identify what operating system you're working in right away. Linux, on the other hand, doesn't have just one of those. So it can be all across the board, which means that you don't get the sort of click-by-click instructions that you would in a Windows environment or in a Mac environment, but you'll usually get a terminal commands to explain how do you use a Linux-type computer. And so Raspberry Pi is going to be the most obvious example. Part of the assignment this week is going to have you playing with a Raspberry Pi. But using terminal commands like you'd see up here on the top right is totally valid. You can even get a Raspberry Pi set up so that it doesn't even have a user interface that's graphical at all, that it's just headless, and it's never intended to be plugged into a monitor whatsoever. So there's all sorts of things that can be interesting. And so Linux can range all the way from fully terminal with no graphic interface to Android and Chrome OS, which are pretty much exclusively graphical interface, and try their very best to hide any terminal things from you. So Linux is really an interesting one, but you've got to keep in mind it's got a different flavor than Mac or Windows. And so the obvious computer that we're going to talk about, because it fills in the maker space, is the Raspberry Pi. And so the Raspberry Pi is a really neat computer. These are usually, it's ARM-based instead of being Intel or AMD. It's an ARM processor that's on its center. These are cheap. They're $40 or less. The Pi Zero is $5. The Pi Zero W is maybe 10. And then there's the new Pi Pico, which is a microcontroller. It's not a small computer. The Raspberry Pi shines in this tiny computer space, and it's really good at being a server for projects or for hosting websites if you want to have something. People will even make their own domain name servers for in their house, where this takes, when you type in a URL like Walmart.com, it would know where it would be processed locally instead of needing to go out to an external server. It makes your internet service very incrementally faster. And it stops some people from being able to track your motions as much online. There's some interesting opportunities for that. But a Raspberry Pi is great because they're cheap. They are very easy to reset. If you totally tank it and you want to reset the thing, it's not hard to just write up a new micro SD card and get it restarted, sort of like setting a new hard drive in a computer. They've got those pins on the top right where you can control electronics. So some people like them for that. But really, I love that they have full web access with complete ability to do that. And there's a really large community surrounding the Raspberry Pi with lots and lots of tutorials that are directly made by the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and they're really good. Also, I did Pi Academy, the second one in America. That was fun. I got to meet Eben Upton, and he was a neat guy. He's the one who invented it. They had all come over from England because it was brand new in San Mateo. Magic mirrors are a great example. Somebody's saying or Aaron's saying in the chat that he has a magic mirror. It's based on a Raspberry Pi, and the Home Assistant is based on a Raspberry Pi. They're great. If you want a small computer to be always on, to manage things, to do a little bit of work here or there, they can be really fantastic resources because they hit that friendly, less than $50 price point to have a full system integrated. And there's a ton of different example projects that you can follow along, just like there's a wider range of Arduino example projects that you can follow along. And Magic Mirror is a good example of even that. It's just a couple lines of code, a couple terminal lines you have to put in to make those happen. But if a Raspberry Pi is the small end of a server, the large end is a server farm. And so this is, and so Kate is asking a good question. What's the difference between Arduino and a Raspberry Pi in one sentence? It's a good summary. The Raspberry Pi is a full standalone computer in itself. Arduino is not. That might be maybe a nice summary. The Arduino can take commands, it can do actions, but it's not a full-blown computer, it's a microcontroller. The Arduino is missing, and so what's the Arduino missing that the Raspberry Pi is not? The Arduino Uno specifically does not have internet access, so you'd need to do some hookups to make that happen. The Arduino is, I would say, better in that it's a little bit more robust. You could, in theory, start to knock out pins and make them not usable anymore, or fry the entire Raspberry Pi a little bit easier with the physical computing things. So you have to be a little careful there, but they're pretty good at making sure that's harder to do than you'd expect. But it's you can see that the Raspberry Pi's got USB ports on it where you can plug in a mouse and keyboard. It's got HDMI out, so you can directly plug it into a monitor. Arduino can't do any of that. That you can watch Netflix on a Raspberry Pi, and that is not something that you're going to be able to get out of an Arduino. So that's the big difference. A Raspberry Pi is a full-blown computer. And so is every server. They're all full-blown computers. They may look different. A server farm, like the last place I taught was also the hometown of Progressive Insurance. And they have a server farm at their facility that is like, the server farm dictates the way the building is built, because it generates enough heat that it needs active cooling. They have to refrigerate the floor. You can see in this picture of a server room, those blue like air handlers to move stuff out. These sorts of computers can really dictate sort of what's going on. And big businesses depend on their internet service so much that usually they'll duplicate the entire system in the East Coast power grid and the West Coast power grid, because I had a friend at Progressive who told me if their computer servers went down for 48 hours consistently, they would never be able to catch up with the computations that they've missed out on. So it's fascinating and super important for large businesses that these server farms exist and that they're stable and that they can get them to keep running no matter what, no matter what sort of crazy things arise. But you can get yourself a server set up on just a Raspberry Pi Zero, which is this thing that's like half the size of a credit card. So if you want a little website, you can totally make that happen with a Raspberry Pi Zero. But you can also scale it all the way up to these giant room-sized things. However, those are physical objects that build servers. And so when you're going, like if you go to a major company, like if you go to an Amazon website, there is somewhere a server like that is absolutely what's hosting it. There's a whole bunch of other things that can happen. But sometimes companies realize that for smaller businesses, building a server farm, setting that up, that's too much infrastructure to really apply to a particular business application. So what has become very popular, almost universal, is that smaller, middle-sized businesses don't set up their own server farms. They don't want to, it takes extra capacity, people power, real estate. And so instead, places like Amazon or Microsoft Azure or Google will host servers that then you can buy some server compute space on. So if I want to spin up a business, I just pay for some server space. And this is generally true. If you're paying for a website, you're probably paying realistically for the server space and time on some machine. Amazon Web Services has become the major player. If you were to try and imagine what Amazon's business model was, online shopping is probably only a teeny tiny part of it. Web services is probably their number 2 part of their business, and just general logistics is the number 1 part of their business, if you were to take an inventory of what Amazon really does right now. But there's tons of options. All 6 of these that are up there, Amazon, Cloudflare, Heroku, Azure, Cloud, and GitHub, they all will let you run websites from their platform. And so I would put them into the camp of cloud computing. It means that they're offering you a service like GitHub Pages, where you can upload code and there's a computer that you're not in charge of hitting the reset button. You're not worried about the firmware updates. You're not worried about any of those sorts of things. They sort of remove that stress away from you. And even more so, Heroku does a great job of not even making you worry about, is it a Windows computer or a Linux computer or a Mac that's running your website. They actually do platform as a service where you upload code and then just say run and it just happens. which is getting closer to Docker containers, which we'll talk about more next week. But platform as a service is a neat way to get a website up and running, and Heroku totally has a free tier, and I think Cloudflare does as well in GitHub. If you wanted to make a website, and yeah, Amazon and bookstore, it feels like such a distant memory. There's all sorts of things that have changed about the internet over our time together. Okay, but how do you interface with a server? And I guess I'm missing the main one of like you ask for a website and it sends you one. I suppose I should have included that in these slides now that I'm thinking about it. But one of the nicest ways that some people like to interface with a server is with a GUI, a graphic user interface. So that's like what a computer looks like normally. So some people, when they want to talk to a server, they want it to look and feel like a computer. So they'll use a GUI, or sometimes they'll remote into a computer that is maybe even a virtual machine. And so if you work for a company that uses Citrix to log in, this is what you're doing. You're logging in and they're simulating a computer on a server somewhere, and that is being sent to you over the network. I think that generally Citrix, which is a great service, don't get me wrong, it's a pretty bad user experience because it eats up so much processing power to not only do the computer stuff, but then encode it. And there's a lag time, there's all the network drag. It's critically important for if maybe you're working at a hospital and you need to do paperwork remotely, or in the whole remote things. But you might have noticed, and it looks like Lila's talking about Citrix for work. You might have noticed that it's a less than pleasant experience at times. And yes, GUI is graphic user interface. You're totally right. That's all of the pictures that go along with a computer networking, the icons, the logos, the things that you click on, the background, all of that is your graphic user interface. It's the reason why you have the nice screen, which feels like a weird thing until we get to this next part. The terminal is a lot closer to how machines work. And so Arduino recently upgraded to Arduino 2.0. You might have seen that. But in between the Arduino 1.0 that almost all of us would have installed and Arduino 2, they released a command line version. So they wrote commands for a computer that doesn't have any bearing about what the program looks like, and it's just about what it's doing. You can imagine that if I'm editing a picture in Photoshop, and I say I want to lighten a few of the pixels and I sweep a tool across it, what it's doing is it's altering the RGB color values of those pixels. There's definitely something that's code-based happening in there, but the GUI makes it so I can just swipe it across and it does it. But somewhere deep inside, there's code saying at these pixels, you're going to change by this amount, which is fascinating. And most software is built in a command line first version, and then the GUI gets built on top of it, rather than the other way around. And so the same is true about generally computers. You might remember a Commodore 64 from, I had one as a kid. It was, I don't know why anyone gave it to me. It was plopped down. There was some helicopter game I enjoyed. But at that point, and even earlier, the computers before that, you would mostly communicate with them through a terminal, where you put in terminal commands. They might do some calculations and spit things back at you. The very first applications of computers were all done this way. Over here, I've got a couple of screen grabs. This is MS-DOS, and this is MS-DOS. But I took this screen capture yesterday of PowerShell on my Windows 10 computer. The terminal is still a completely valid way to control a computer if you can do it entirely text-based. And SSH is a way to do that even remotely through a network. So SSH is a secure shell. It basically is a network porthole for you to use terminals on another computer. And that's going to be what we focus on a little bit this week. This is great for headless Raspberry Pis. It's a really good way to get a Raspberry Pi up and running. If you have one that you want to run, maybe you have one that you want to host a website. Like I have a robot bartender that I made, and it doesn't have a monitor that it's attached to. It hosts a website instead. So it does output some graphical things, but as a server, not by being directly connected to a screen itself. So there's no like screen on the robot. You can just go to a website if you're on my Wi-Fi. And so it's a neat trick. But secure shell is a good way to interact with a computer remotely. If you can do that, and here's the instructions for how you enable that on a Raspberry Pi. You can get into the terminal and actually take a look at a Raspberry Pi that's nearby. And basically it removes the need for the graphical user interface. If you're running a server for a business, a professional DevOps team is not really going to need their graphic user interface. They're going to mostly just interact with it by the terminal because they can do the commands that they need to do that way. Many still will. The graphic user interface can be helpful. I find it generally comforting. Terminal is sometimes a little scary because you're staring into the black void of all that text, but it's a totally reasonable way to control a computer is through this terminal. So if you're going to do that, there are many different ways that you can control a computer. And so there's Linux commands that are worth knowing. And so I'm going to pull up a terminal in just a couple of minutes, and we're going to be able to see sort of how these things work. And so let me actually just do it right now. But I'm going to pull up here we're doing a live demo. These are always a bad idea, just so that we're all clear. But in here is a terminal that I've got on my Windows computer. So this is just me all set up. I should probably try and update to the newer Powershell. But Powershell is one of the terminals on Windows. And so in here, I can try and connect to 162. Okay, so in here, I'm connecting to a Raspberry Pi that is not my computer. This is a computer that's a server that's in MakeHaven somewhere. And so there's a password that I did share with all of you. And now I'm in. Now I can just start to issue commands. That might be hard to see. Do this. And in here, I can start to interact with that computer. So it may not look like a whole lot, but if I zoom this in a little, this is listing off all of the files that are in that root directory that are there. So these are these very hard to read blue text items. Those are folders in that computer in the home directory. Sort of like if you open up on a Windows computer, if I open users Corey, inside there's a folder for my desktop, there's a folder for my pictures, music, all those sorts of things are there. These are those exact same folders, but in Linux. And then CD is to change directory. And then I can list out what's there again. And there's two folders inside that directory. One that's Corey was here and one that's here I am .py. Those are the names of the files, just like you can have the name of your favorite website files be cheeseburger.html, right? So those sorts of things you can have and play around with. But this is being able to interact with that Raspberry Pi computer through the terminal. You can even do it with Nano, is a crazy little text editor. So here's this, where I can open up this little text editor through the terminal. Oh, not here I am .text. We'll do here I am .py. And so this is a little tiny text editor. This is called Nano, and it's able to read through this code on the Raspberry Pi. So you can see I've got a little cursor. This is a program that's running in there. There's no scroll bar. It's definitely a little bit more awkward, but this is very much like an Arduino program. So in here, I've got like my import libraries that you might have seen in an Arduino sketch. Then in here would be, I even wrote in that this is like the void setup. So you can see that there would be a GPIO setup and then a counter and maybe a time limit, some of those things. And then as we go down through, this is just going to count down and blink a light. So this is part of the assignment, is to be able to get to something like this. And then there's other commands like down here at the bottom. And the cursor, by the way, doesn't work with the terminal at all. I'm just using it to highlight things as like a pointer. I'm going to get out of here without changing anything. So I hit Control X and I can get out, and I can do other things to play around. So this is the terminal like this is definitely its own whole set of resources. But one of the things I can do even remotely is say, I would like this to restart. So I'll do sudo reboot, and it just closed it. So this is now closed by the host, and I've got a whole new setup that I'm in because I was able to do a sudo, which is saying super user do. I'm in charge of the computer when you have that command. And then sudo reboot meant that I want to take over the most important user level in that Raspberry Pi and give it a command to restart the machine. These are some of the really good, quick, need to know commands that you might want to have. for a Raspberry Pi. Sudo is so that you can do most things. You won't have file read-write access on a lot of files, but sudo will let you do that. ls is to list out things. cd is change directory. Nano is that little text editor that we came up with. Nano like opened up that file and let me play around with it. I'm going to open up it again. I was just giving I'm giving the Raspberry Pi a second to get started. Make directory makes a new folder. Python is for running a Python program. ifconfig is helpful to see the IP address of a particular Raspberry Pi. Most things have help, and then Control-C is good if you get stuck. You can stop most programs. So these are definitely a little bit weird, but let me pull up PowerShell again. And so here's Windows PowerShell, dragging this back up to the top screen so we can see what's going on. I'll reconnect to that Raspberry Pi and we can get connected. So SSH, I want to have a secure shell connection. And so let's do this nice and big. Secure shell connection to the user Pi at that Raspberry Pi's IP address. So 192.168.1.162. I just have that memorized. That's all. There's no like good way to deduce that. Then the password. And I get connected in. Now I can run things like ifconfig, and then I'll be able to see what's the IP address of that Raspberry Pi. And this is where that is the iNet address. So there's that to be able to get to that computer. That's how I was able to get that. But I can come in and if I'm scrolling around a little bit, in here I might be able to list off all these. And if I do cd to foundations class, I can go back into there, list out those files. And if I do nano is the text editor. So I'm going to do nano and then a space and then Corey was here.txt. Now this is a text editor. So in here, this is just a document that I wrote up. And all I'm doing is able to change this. And I need to zoom out a little bit to get all those controls again. They're down there somewhere. There we go. Oh, it's way smaller now. Sorry about that. But these are the same commands. So down across here, these are all the things that I can do with the little arrow on the bottom being to hit control. So I'm just going to delete the hello all to prove that this is a text editor. Hit Control X, Y, save, and then I'm back out to here. If I go back in, since that's a text document, Corey was here.txt, and I hit enter, you can see I deleted that text. And I'd be able to add it back in. This is like the very earliest versions of Microsoft Word, where you'd have a document that's just a couple of lines of text, and it's no formatting, it's nothing else. So it's definitely an interesting platform to be able to use. But in there, you've got all these different resources that you can play around with. Python is a neat one because on a Raspberry Pi, it lets you control those GPIO pins. So you can have a web server that is also able to manipulate physical things. And that's going to be the goal. If you run that Python hereiam.py, it starts a blinking light in the space, and then you can go searching to try and find where that is, which is a neat little goal. I have a 6-minute video to explain exactly what you type in to make that happen so you don't have to guess. But it's a good way to sort of see the interaction between your computer and a server, and then that server being able to manipulate things in the physical world, which is fascinating. That means that you can set up servers in your life to be able to do all sorts of stuff, to have interfaces where they give you web pages or where they do all sorts of strange things, and then maybe even manipulate what's going on inside your house, like a home assistant, for example. There's a whole cheat sheet on these to really go a lot deeper. But that is the core assignment, is I'm hiding. So this is the Raspberry Pi that's hidden. I've been connecting to it. And so your goal is going to be to SSH into the Raspberry Pi, to edit the file Corey was here.txt, to include your name at the end, just so that we can see like everybody was there. You can leave a happy message if you want. Run the command Python here I am, and I'll do that in just a second, and then go physically find the Raspberry Pi in MakeHaven, which ought to be fun. If you're already good at some of these things, you could instead decide, oh, I know how to do that. Just get yourself a Raspberry Pi and sort of play up setting one up. Again, these can be $10 or less. They don't need to be a very expensive investment for a Raspberry Pi. You probably have an old micro SD card sitting around and a camera that you don't use anymore. Or maybe you're already good at some of these things, and this is a good 2 weeks to really learn a new to you server skill. Like the one that I've been focused on recently is getting connected to APIs. So getting to use other people's resources on web pages that I build. And that's what an API is all about. It lets you make those connections in ways that are really interesting. But that said, I wanted to pull up this PowerShell one more time just to pull up this trick and see what's going on with the, oh, that was Zoom. Here's this. And so SSH pi at 162, there's that. It doesn't take, once you get quick at it, the thing about the terminal is that it's fast. And so I can do, like if I know where that file is, I can just say Python foundations class slash here I am dot pi. If I do that, you'll see that it's running the program. You can't see it in the space, but somewhere there's an LED that's blinking. And so this is just saying that you can go search for it for 5 minutes. You've got a timer, and then if time runs out, you restart it again. But it's just a way to interact with that server that does exist in our space, and you can go start to explore. This is one of many ways that you can play around with these different applications, but it's a neat one. Just seeing that link between something that feels like a website getting connected to something in the physical world is a really fascinating connection. But there's lots of different ways that we can understand this. And I hope that you guys have some interesting questions about the internet, and we can sort of wander our way through them. There's all sorts of strange things to know and think about. And so we're actually a little bit early on this one because there's such a wide range of depth that the internet can be, that as we talk about servers and apps, I don't want to get anybody too stuck or abandoned because we go way deeper than where they'd be. So let me first open it up to say, does anyone have any questions about this and sort of like where this is going? This is a really concise assignment, one that's really tight and tiny. It may not take you very long. You can also go much, much deeper if you want to. So anybody have any questions about the wide range of things we talked about? Let's see here. I'll let people unmute for a second. GitHub and Militide. So this is where people are getting ready to unmute. This is just pulling up the project that I've been working on recently, which is an adaptation of a Tides app. I have a magic mirror at home, and so this is a common notation for magic mirrors. I really want to get something set up so that I can have a Tides page work. And so this is me just storing a little bit of code. I've got a couple of test files here in this docs folder. And this is sort of what I've been working on casually for the last week or two to try and be able to get data from NOAA to turn into something. So here I have an example of this is my vision board of what I want it to look like. I'd like to have it be able to pull the tides and give me a graph for what the tides are going to be in MakeHaven or near MakeHaven and in New Haven. And so I was hoping for something like that, and I was struggling to try and get that to work. If I go back here, but I think I may have gotten it. And so I'm not sure what state I left this in, but it says undefined right now, but that's a lot better than it was earlier. So if we do this, you can often get to inside of pages by hitting F12 in most browsers on a keyboard, and you'll be able to go in and sort of play around with these pieces. So this is getting into being able to play around with what all of this is. This is a readable stream. That starts to turn into all kinds of information. So this is just looking at kind of what is coming through. This is looking at the console, so spitting out different information. I want to get this information here, which is no data found. And I think this is probably you know, a bit of a glitch that I've got worked out in this particular project at this particular save point. But there's all sorts of different things that you can look at to try and explore and expand projects like this. But this is just an example of like a page that's being hosted by GitHub pages. So I've got a little bit of code that's up here on a server that I don't have to manage. I'm not worried about whether it's Linux or Windows or whatever, but GitHub pages gives me the chance to host that. And so there's lots of different options. There's also, if we go to Heroku, there's tons of options in here for cloud applications to be run. This is another one that I really enjoy. It gives a chance for you to set up web pages quickly. It also uses Git to push information back and forth. So it's a little bit tricky, but you can have lots of different languages work. And this is a good way to host a web page where sort of it will scale as you need it to. So let's imagine you want a business to get started on the internet. You would be spinning up quite a bit from there. But this would let you scale sort of as your business grows. You can see that they're definitely using terminal things. A good question is, how do you use this skill set to make an app? Well, the one skill that we're going to have for later is MIT App Inventor. We're going to look at this, and this is really legitimately going to be one of the goals for next week. If you wanted to get started now, you totally could. But MIT App Inventor is like a drag and drop way to build apps. It's kind of wild that it's that easy. You can put them right onto the Android marketplace. And so here's to build your first app. You can follow instructions. And this has got all sorts of things where you can just wander right through this process. It's pretty amazing how well this has been built out so that you can get to those different things. But it is certainly something that's interesting to be able to look at. So here's a tour of the environment where you can build apps this way. If you have backend server things, there's lots of infrastructure that you can build in to make this more interesting or complicated. But I think a good example with App Inventor is to build like a simple calculator, which can sound like a lot, like an easy task. But if you can build an App Inventor app that's just a calculator that will add numbers together, maybe not even subtract, that's actually doing really well. Multiplying and dividing are their own whole complicated things. And so there's some really, and the earliest calculators were just 4-function calculators to add, subtract, multiply, divide. So something like this, you can definitely start to build apps, and being able to tie into APIs and databases and more information will give you a lot more background to be able to do all sorts of things. So this is certainly a neat way to get started. There's all sorts of tutorials that work well with App Inventor. You know, you can see here's like a little painting app that people made, or a whack-a-mole. There's all sorts of things that you can play around with. Another one that's good is if we do create React app, and this is definitely getting a little bit deeper down the wormhole, but if depending on your ability to code in JavaScript, it can be really quick to spin up a single page web app if you can do something like this. So you can run one command and have an app up and running really quickly with Create React App. Now, React is an entire JavaScript framework for hosting websites, but this is the sort of thing that if you know what you're up to with Heroku and or any of those cloud computers and something like Create React Apps or React in general, you can really quickly build out something that's nice and complete with, you know, not too long of an investment. Building your own GUI at this stage is going to be something that's better to do in App Inventor, where the buttons are sort of drag and drop in. There's also, some people really have good luck with, but I've never been productive at it, is a Vnc connection. And so VNC connections here are going to be like a way to get connected, remote access to a computer or to a server. So you could absolutely be connected through something like VNC Connect. There's any number of places that'll do this, but it gives you a way to connect to different computers and sort of look at their desktops instead of looking at their terminals. But I would definitely encourage you to try connecting to terminals for this week's assignment, just to get that experience, even though it may feel like a foreign idea. Here's VNC Viewer. There's several of these that you can play around with.
Can I say something really
Yeah,
quick
absolutely.
about VNC Viewer? VNC Viewer is amazing, but setting it up can be a bit complex in the sense that every computer needs it in order to work. So there's like some boxes to check, but it can be exceedingly useful. I use it a lot to connect to all of my different computers. That said, I want to go back to more terminal usage because it's delightfully simple. Like you may not have a GUI, but a GUI is actually a double-edged sword. It can be more comfortable. Like there's things to click and menus to go through, but sometimes command line is just like straightforward, and that's I think an important distinction.
Yeah, the command line, it's grown on me substantially. Like, because it usually tells you what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
The commands are nice and clear, and it feels foreign at first, for sure. It definitely does not feel as nice as what I love having a nice monitor on a computer and having nice, clean things to look at and to be able to control those graphical pieces. But as you get more in touch with the code and the terminal piece of controlling computers, you can be really efficient and you can get access to some things that are harder to get access to without it. It's kind of like, in some ways, learning to get into the terminal is kind of like learning to get into exploring the mountains, right? Everybody can love to go visit a mountain hotel, maybe to go to Lake Louise. There's a giant hotel that's there. You can park yourself down, you fly into Calgary, and you just go right over. It can be a really nice experience. But if you want to get deeper into the mountains, you may need to learn how to camp, right? And that takes a little bit of effort. You've got to, maybe you want an RV, you want to get a campsite that's hooked up, you've got all those things. And then it takes more skill to get a tent. And then if you want to camp somewhere that doesn't have electricity, or maybe eventually you get to camping without even really a campsite, you just have a permit. As you get deeper and deeper into this skill set, you can get to more remote parts of computing that other people don't have access to, because they sort of are hindered by losing those creature comforts. It definitely feels like a similar kind of experience where as you get better at camping, you can get further into the mountains. And as you get better with terminal and like the abstract parts of computing, you have more and more control over what the computer's up to. And it may seem optional, but one thing that's really helpful is even just a little bit of code and like knowing how and where to put it into a computer. You can start to automate things that make your life much easier with work. Definitely there's been scripts, grading. I used to grade with a spreadsheet. Now it's weird because everything is completely online. I used to grade with spreadsheets where I would have it automatically make histograms, a little bit of code here or there, and I can automatically see how my kids are doing as I type in their scores. Those little pieces in computing are definitely worth exploring. And I want you to think about those this week as you're hopping into servers. Sort of like, how do you get, not only code for an Arduino is sort of one interesting realm, but as you spread that out into deeper computers and into servers, you can really go a lot deeper. And then even more so when you can get code to have computers talk to each other, which is what that API thing was. I'm trying to request information from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, about the predicted tides for the day, so that I can display it on a screen that's always up in my house at home, so that I can specifically go ask this government agency to give me information daily about where the tides are going to be in case I wanted to kayak or know what the tides are going to be at a certain time of day. The further you get down that wormhole, the more interesting skills you'll be able to unlock. And it's basically an infinite well, because there's all sorts of information around the world. There's all sorts of different skills that computers are developing, and it's constantly changing. I'm going to put in the chat a 1 hour long video about the state of web development in 2021. And those sorts of videos get released all the time because this is constantly expanding. And certainly there are many, many, many careers surrounding computer infrastructure. So there's lots of things. And I'm totally game to answer any questions that you have as things pop up, or like as we're exploring ideas and concepts over the next week, the next 2 weeks. This week is going to be that really concise, like make the LED blink inside of MakeHaven. And so there's a video guide on how to do that that's going to be posted very soon. I was compiling it just before class, the rendering. And then there's next week is going to be focused more on building an app with MIT App Inventor so that you can play around with that and build your very first app because it's definitely fun. And so that's sort of our goal, thinking in that longer term for what to do with this. But many of you will have different experiences prior to today. So if that is not an appropriate set of skills for you to build over the next couple of days or the next couple of weeks, you should absolutely try out whatever it is that feels right to you. And you probably have a sense for that. If you've never used SSH before, 100% you should do it. It is worth it. It will not be a 6-minute experience on your first try, and that's totally fine. But as you get better, there's some interesting ways that you can sort of fiddle with it and play around and do all sorts of things. Maybe even just learning how to install Raspbian on a Raspberry Pi could be useful. How do you turn one on and set one up? That's its own whole skill set. So there's all those sorts of things that you can explore as we're going. And Raspberry Pi, if you're trying to stay in that environment, is got a ton of tutorials that will very nicely walk you through. A lot of them are written by a guy named Ben, and then there's all sorts of other people who do that work. So there's tons of cool things to play around with over the next 2 weeks that can range anywhere from like establishing your own server presence online, starting to build a portfolio of websites and servers that you're hosting, so just playing around with your first steps in the terminal or a secure shell. There's a ton of range. Yep. But that I'd say would be it. This is definitely sort of a wandering game, and I hope that questions pop up throughout the week and we can all help each other. But that said, it is pretty much 8 o'clock right now, and we just had a wildcard week. So I'm very interested to hear what everybody's up to. I have a few things that I can share that I worked on as well. But I'm interested to hear what any of you have done. If you'd like to unmute and go for it for some sharing. Aaron, go for it.
Sure. So it's a little comforting to be back in my wheelhouse again. I just wanted to say that. So I definitely want to challenge myself, and if if I can be of help to anyone, or if you just want to explain something to me, whatever works for you, you let me know. I too have figured out a thing or two maybe, and I too am on my journey of better understanding this stuff. So something that I've really wanted to learn for a really long time that Corey was talking about are APIs. Application programming interfaces are how different programs talk to each other and share data. Like when you authenticate with Google or Apple, or from in a different website, how they ultimately authenticate and allow that connection to occur is very interesting. But it has a lot of professional use for me, because when I'm pulling in data from different sources, if I can connect to an API, that literally steps my professional game up. That's probably the single biggest thing that I could learn how to do. So I'm a little invested in figuring out very simply how to do it. I've been developing like a 2-week long, here's my curriculum for myself. A big part of that is like getting a clue. Like what other things do I need to know? And Ruby, I've been thinking about what you said the other week that was like genius, and it's like getting to the stuff you don't know that's going to hold you up, so that way you can get past that from step one. And that just like blew my mind. So that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. And then that way I feel like I'll be more confident and able to really like sink my teeth in and hopefully get somewhere where I'm like, I'm getting it, and then let that sort of snowball. So that's where I'm at. It probably won't be particularly pretty, but I hope to have something to show for it. And Corey, thank you again for that video. I checked out that video series and then the channel, and I was like, oh my God, this might even be better than what I've already found. So it's always nice to know that there are gems out there. So that's what I'm going to be up to for the next 2 weeks.
There's tons of cool things in here. Actually, I'm headed back to that Tides project. I was digging through, this is what I spent a fair amount of time thinking about, was how do I get connected to the API, which is like the information from NOAA. I want to know the information from NOAA about what is the tide going to look like at any given moment. And so in here, it turns out I've got 2 comments. You can get your API, like you can get a custom URL. So if you go to this website, you can start to play in, or you can start to figure out exactly like what you want your thing to be. And let me grab.
Sounds like it would pass it through the URL, right? Your token ID and secret.
Well, and so like we open up this data API, and this is a very friendly one. Sometimes they're not as clear as this one is. But I can say that I want to talk about the New Haven station, that I want to know the water level for every 6 minutes. And I want, some of these settings, but this is the link where if I click on, if I have this particular URL and I go here, then it will spit back some information about like, what is the tide about in those moments? And so I get information like this back. And that's not a very pretty website, but that's a server giving information. And if I can collect that with some code, I can integrate it into something like my Magic Mirror so that I can turn it into a picture, right? I can depict that information however I want, but it's an API is a great way to get information from one server to another, usually from others to yours, so that you can pull that in and use it however you'd like. So this has been my, like, I'm absolutely exploring a similar thing. So I'll send the link to this project on GitHub so that you can play around with that. Let me stop sharing. So yeah, there's that. Anybody else want to go next, or I can share quickly? Okay, nobody's jumping on it, so I'm going to do this. All right, I did this on the, and Ruby helped for sure, but I did this on the Gerber, which is a big piece of 2x4s that are all glued together. And then the Gerber went through and it milled out this crazy surface. I'm going to use this as a tooling for a composite layup. You can see it cut like that curve on there. Actually, wish that this was rounded also. I'm going to have to manually round that and do some sanding. But this was a shape that was cut out. I'm going to use this to make a composite. So this is like a little teeny skate park for those fingerboards that were way popular in the early 2000s. That's what that's for. But the tech decks, that's right. Yeah, so this is a skate park for tech decks, or I'm going to use it to be a catch basin for the bar robot that I'm just sort of circling back around to. So that if water spills, if any liquid spill, they get caught in this basin and they don't spill out over. This low spot or high spot back here, I'll put a float switch so that it can tell like, oh, there's liquid in there, and I'm going to cut off all the pumps. So like there's a whole collection of things. When you get layers and layers deeper, you have different goals that start to develop from the things that you're building. But it was a big deal to make this, to have the Gerber up and running. This is a 3D design, so it did a roughing pass and then a finish pass. The roughing pass, it had like a sort of a step pyramid kind of look as it went up. And then the finishing pass, I got these straight lines that are actually, even though they may look like a lot, you can sort of hear them, but they'll sand down really quickly. So this is something that I'm excited about, and I'll be able to turn this into the tooling that I need to move ahead with further steps in the project. I'm a little bummed about these 2 teeth here. I'm gonna need to fill those in with like some plaster, maybe something solid that I can just sort of mush into shape. And so I'll figure that out and cross that bridge when we get to it. But yeah, this was maybe 3 hours of milling. It takes a long time to do a 3D toolpath. When you get to make something big, I'm going to definitely encourage you to build in 2.5D instead of building in 3D as we look at those things. And so we'll talk a bit more about that when we get to the make something big week. So that was what I was working on. So there's a ton of cool things. But how about, let's see, who's next up for sharing?
I'll go.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm so tired and I'm gonna share my screen. It's been a hectic, oh my God. I made these rat coasters for my friend. Red oak wood, same old, but I really like how they came out. I may or may not have stolen these images from stock websites. Maybe, I don't know. But I was playing around with different textures and I love it. Besides that, I got a lot of help from Corey to finalize a real like working movable plug in plug out prototype of can you still hear me? Did that? No, I didn't.
Yep.
Of the cloud. And so we have an Arduino shield, we have the LED lights. Here's it doing a little rainbow strand test. And I have just been back and forth talking to my client, and it may or may not happen. It's just so busy, like just trying to figure that out. But I'm so excited. Like this came from an idea and it's finally like physical and here, and I can like feasibly make another one. And then yeah, I'm so happy to see this. Like I want to make more lamps. What else? I made a paperweight, a mold, a cast, excuse me, using concrete. And I don't have any pictures of it. I left it on the 48-hour table. Corey, do you think you could grab it for me?
I can absolutely go get it.
Okay, so back when I was in high school, I went to this art high school. So on top of my academic, there was an extra, like a second high school, basically. And there was this kid who filled Ziploc bags with cement, and I thought they were the coolest freaking thing ever. And I wanted one, so I filled a Ziploc bag with cement, and like I put some rubber bands around it to give it some shape. But I love it. It's kind of gnarly and it's a little gross, but I love the texture on it. Yeah. So I'm so happy I was able to do that. And it's kind of heavy. And so I'm gonna try that again. A friend of mine told me that if I put in styrofoam, it would make it super light. And I'm really interested in that idea. So I'm gonna experiment, and I'll get back to y'all next week. But
Corey, can I ask us a silly thing? Corey, can you just talk for a second and then hold that for a few minutes so we can have some video of that that's recorded?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the concrete bag, and the bag is gone at this point. So it's just it's here, and you can see where the rubber band clearly came through. The whole thing is certainly like 3 or 4 pounds.
it has a nice weight to it.
Yeah, it's nice and hefty, but you can see like the seam is very clear from the bag itself, and then all of the different wrinkles and things that you totally would expect from a plastic bag. It's very easy to tell that this was in a bag. Like when I first walked over and looked at it, I thought it still was in the bag, but the bag's gone.
Yeah. I love that little cement piece. Nice decoration, nice something. Maybe it'll be art in the future. I don't know yet, but that's it. That's it for me.
Cool. All right, Kate, it looks like you're unmuted. Would you like to?
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, I was unmuted from my question before, but sure, since I'm unmuted, let's just roll into it. Share screen. Sure. Let me, is that gonna work? Does that work? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this week, I learned some things from an actual person, which was really, which was much more successful than I had been in the past. I was doing some more work with glass, and I learned about different kinds of glass, which gave me a lot of better understanding of some of my past less than successful attempts. Here is some learning about fusing glass that's actually manufactured to fuse so that it melts together.
Huh. Yeah, that looks really cool.
Which was really fun to do and learn about. This is art glass, I've learned, which is stained glass. And that's why it didn't fuse, because it's not all about the temperature. There's also some science, other science happening here, manufacturing science. So learned about that. Also learned more about molds and slumping and why you don't want to go over your mold and different ways. I learned about all the reasons why this didn't work, but interestingly, it was different kinds of glass. It wasn't fused before molding, and there's multiple reasons. I go through them, but sometimes you get kind of happy accidents. I thought that ended up not at all what I expected, but it is kind of a cool piece to have. So I learned a lot of stuff, was able to go back, and here is actual success using the slumping mold, which was exciting to see. And now I feel like all of these things have built into where I feel like I'm now ready to be at a point where I can make my own molds and understand how they work and understand what pieces to use with them. So that was good. Also, when all else fails, earrings. So these are some things that I was messing around with that I now understand why and how they worked in different ways. So that was kind of fun. This is my final dish, which I guess it's a dish. I don't know what to call it. It's my little slumped bowlish thing, and I'm happy with it. And I also got my wind chime done. So I did this with the glass source, which is who I was referencing before. This is sort of supposed to be a sort of feeling like a wave thing, and this is the complete one. And it makes a really nice glass tinkling sound. And this is all fused glass, so that was really fun. So a lot of learning.
That is such strong work. Like, not only is the glass itself beautiful, but it's so much. It's clear that you've been on that journey for such a long time, and it's wonderful to watch it pay off for you. I really hope that you were like elated the moment that you opened the stove and it was melted in just the right way.
So many times I've walked into that kiln with like my fingers and toes crossed and opened it and been like, damn it, why was this? And today, was it this morning? Yeah, it was early this morning because I fired it overnight last night. I opened it and I was like, I think I understand it. Like, it really should work now. And it did, which was really, really exciting. So
that's awesome.
The glass source is wonderful. I'm hoping to get a group of MakeHaveners who are interested together, and we could go down and do a class together, which I think would be really fun. They're great and have good stuff. And it would also help if you're interested in using our kiln to learn about it in the ways that I did. Also, I got my knitting machine badge. So
yeah, there's so many cool things. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the proliferation of classes that spin up from like weird experiences we've had, whether it's rug making or maybe Kate, you'd run a glass making class. I definitely know people that are looking to find new hobbies as we can like marginally be near people again. Right? Like that's an exciting moment to be in. Also, worth mentioning before we hop into the next person, we're like 2 weeks out from everybody in Connecticut 16 and up being able to sign up to get vaccinated. So that's exciting. Way to go, everybody. All right, and so let's see, we've got 3 people left who haven't yet presented. So
all the 15-year-olds out there are just like, dang. You know,
you'd be surprised how many 15-year-olds I know that feel exactly that way. Being a high school teacher. So
I can go.
Yeah.
I sent a picture to folks of the surface mounted circuit. I did, and that was really satisfying, especially to see that it worked, kind of. I'm not sure why moving the lead around on the pad made it act weird, or just holding it just didn't like all of them. No idea. Maybe you have some thoughts about that, Corey.
Yeah,
But
I bet it's oxidized. Just a cleaning would probably do it pretty well.
oh, cool. Okay, that's so good to know. So yeah, I'm just excited that it worked. Because it means that all that soldering and it was like actually a great learning experience, because I'm just amazed that those little tiny delicate resistors can actually take a lot of abuse from kind of clumsy new hands, and same with the capacitors. And so yeah, it was really fun, and I'm happy it works, and I'm ready to become a surgeon now. And then I took 2 pieces of my plywood, and I designed, I started to make the initial sizing of both my kitchenette and my cabinet that's going to go between what will be a bathroom and the bed right here. So not very bright in here, but that happened. So I did that yesterday with Jen, actually, because I'm having back problems, and because I wasn't too comfortable on the panel saw. She helped me take down the 2 pieces of ply that I had in storage and cut them to size, and it's fairly accurate. Wasn't any more off than maybe a 1/4, which I accounted for, thinking that would happen. So I made sure that all the cuts were bigger so that I can kind of finagle a little later. And yeah, it's gonna be great. So I have those pieces cut and I'm ready to build. That's it.
That's awesome. Yeah, the panel saw is a neat saw because of the ability to cut down the huge sheets. It's also it's definitely best operated, I think, with 2 people if you can. Just because it's just so big. It takes sort of like muscling it in and then questioning as you're going. It's good to have somebody around.
Like a second pair of eyes, and also, although it's pressed fairly flat against it, I think the cuts were fairly accurate because I was pushing on one side while pulling the saw, and Jen was pushing on the other. So I think just having another hand to keep it stabilized. I mean, if you were really wanting to play the twister game, I'm sure you could push one side with your foot and the other with your hand while doing a dead squat. So.
Yeah, only marginally safe though. So we'll just stick to that.
Yeah. I wouldn't
recommend that technique. Let's
yeah.
So
I'm
maybe
sure it's been done on a panel saw, but
yeah. So yeah, maybe have Kate's Pitbull just press on it with both its paws. Anyway, yeah, that's it. That was my week.
Cool. That's very neat. All right, we've got Lila and Ileana. Lila, you want to go? Looks like you're. Yep.
Yeah, I can go. I'm having like lighting issues and my internet's being a little weird, but I think it's all right. All right. So I started a rug. I didn't finish, but I started a rug, and I made these little plant markers on the laser cutter. Hold on. See them.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah.
It's definitely gardening season starting up too.
I don't know if you can.
Those look amazing.
Yeah, they're lovely. Let's see. Over.
Yeah, I made a whole bunch. I could even post like the file I used to make it if anyone wants to make their own little. You could make put your name on it or whatever. And I showed this to Kate yesterday. I wanted to make a little wallet before I showed you guys. I'm just too excited. I printed on fabric again. Hold on, I need to get a better. I'm having. Nope.
Oh, but there he is. There's a little, yeah.
I think I need to take a picture and post it, but it came out so good. Kate saw it. It looks
Oh,
really
that's a
good.
good,
Looks
that's good one.
good.
That's nice and clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Monty's he's, you know, you can see him.
Yeah, I just wanted to try it. Like, it wasn't really a big planned thing, just to do it and try something with it. And I didn't pour the concrete this week. I bought the plasticizer, but I'll get that done for next week.
Cool.
Did we get a good visual of that? Because I have a couple pictures I can share. I was trying to grab them, so I didn't see if, were you guys able to see the laser?
Oh,
Yeah.
I can post it. Or you can share it, whatever.
I'm gonna share. Can we see?
Oh,
There,
look
my-
at the one on the left is so good.
It is, yeah. Like, I'm very excited about this ability.
Yeah, it's such a, like, I'm wondering how lasering fabric could go so well. Like, you laser a design and then you could also laser to a template. Like, if you wanted to make a bag with him on it,
Right.
like
It's so
laser
clean.
cutting the pieces of the bag.
When I saw this, when Lila showed them to me, when I was first looking at it, I was like, "Is that vinyl? Like, was that silk screen? Like, it's so clear. It's just really amazing."
Lila, do you remember
Exciting.
your settings?
So it's the same settings I used that I posted. I think I just like upped the power by like 2 points.
Like, it doesn't look like charred or like burned or anything. I love
Nothing.
it.
I know, and I washed the fabric before I used it. So yeah, I'm gonna wash it again, but I should have a purse done in a couple days. I didn't have any interior fabric to make it more stiff, but
And
yeah,
what
that's what I'm
fabric was that you were using? You told me. But
One of them is 98% cotton and 2% spandex, and the other one was like I think the blue one is like a poly cotton blend. I have it written down, but yeah, I'll post more when I'm done.
Yeah, those look so good.
Yeah. All right, next.
That's awesome. All right. Ileana, you wanna go for it?
Yeah. The mail was not on my side. I ordered a bunch of things to try. I got the same kit that Jamie used. But I haven't had a chance to solder it. I'm gonna try and go in tomorrow after work. And then I also got a Jitterbug soldering kit because I wanted to practice soldering on an irregular shape. With literally one of those PCB boards, but it's in the shape of a bug. And some of the, I don't know, I forgot what they're called. The ones that go through the hole.
Some of the through-hole components.
Through-hole components actually end up being the legs.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, so I thought that would be interesting, but that didn't get here in time. And then I was gonna do also, this is a little bit more practical rather than like experimental. I'm trying to learn or teach myself with a little bit of help from my boyfriend how to change the brake rotors and brake pads on my car. So I ordered brake pads and brake rotors.
Yeah, that's a good skill.
That's awesome. I want to
Yeah.
learn that.
Yeah, I pretty excited because I've helped him a lot with some car stuff, but this is like, I've never seen him do this. Yes, I can link to the Jitterbug. I will do that.
Yeah, I need new
Yeah.
brain.
I did that to my car just before moving to Connecticut. If you want any backup, I can help you with that too.
Okay. Yeah, so like I have to get some tools, I think, that I don't have. I gotta read. I also got like, where is it? Hold on. This
A
is
lot of
also,
the time, you should be able to borrow some of those tools from like AutoZone. Sometimes they'll lend them to you,
okay.
even for like little to no fee.
Is there a
So
lending, like the tool lending library at MakeHaven?
it's a real specific tool to push back the piston for a brake pad.
Got it.
I also got,
if we discover those, as we discover those kinds of things that would be helpful for the lending library, though, we should definitely bring
Oh, yeah.
them forth.
For like a $50 part max to buy. So is
Yeah.
that the Chilton book? Is that what that is?
This is the Haynes repair manual for my car
Yeah, there you go.
that I've been reading and learning a lot of stuff about my car, about cars in general that I had no idea about. So that was my week, was because I bought a used car and it needs a lot of work. I can drive it, but if I want to keep driving it, I need to do a lot of work to it. And kind of trying to save money out of necessity. So trying to learn a bunch of things by myself. And I was actually, I don't know if there is one. I would assume there isn't, but is there like a car repair channel in Slack?
I was just thinking that I don't think there is technically, but I think you should ask. We could like totally create one. You know, I mean, like you can create one. You can create one at any time.
Because I was just reading in the Slack that there's a key that opens up in the back door to go to the garage, and I was thinking like that would be really good for borrowing tools to go into the garage to actually. Well, I'm sure they don't want you doing like auto work in the garage, but I mean, needs must, I guess. I wouldn't imagine doing that parked on Chapel Street, but I don't know. I just thought it would be interesting to, because I guess it's like you're not necessarily making new things, but you are using a lot of maker tools.
It's yeah.
You could. Oh. I was just gonna say, you could park at the dog park just right down the street from MakeHaven. And right across from there, if you get into like a jam, I think it's Firestone. And you could probably ask them to help if something goes terribly wrong. They'll have all the tools there.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I've definitely done that job and then realized halfway through I needed something at a time when I was living alone, and then like needed to call someone to say like, hey, can you give me a ride to an auto parts store?
Yeah.
Like,
Because it's like once you get started, from what I've read, like once you get started, you can't really stop.
not unless you got another car.
Exactly. So, and I know I need to.
Like
Go ahead.
like that, they don't. I feel like they should have like a bay where you can like pull in your car and start work, and then be right there to get the thing. Like that would make some.
Ooh, that's kind of a fun idea.
Yeah, that's kind of awesome.
Like a
actually.
a self-service bay.
Yeah, like anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this kind of like falls in line with my new job, which is working for an aftermarket auto performance parts not manufacturer, distributor. So I get to look at a lot of really cool car parts and take pictures of them all the time, but I have to learn about cars for my job. So I figured, well, I might as well start with my car, because that's going to be immediately useful to me. And once I understand that, then it'll be a lot easier to expand out to like an Audi S4, which apparently is really popular in Connecticut, which I didn't know. And yeah, like I guess one cool thing I can share with you guys is that I got to watch a turbo charger get installed, and then the exhaust system on the bottom of the car with the catback exhaust, which none of these words I knew before, but it's really cool. And yeah, I guess I'm just trying to get excited about it, because honestly, when I started this job, I was like, why did you hire me? I don't know anything about cars. So I'm trying to get excited about it. So that was my project this week, was I was going to do this weekend, but they didn't get here until today. So, but in terms of this week, I do eventually want to try and recreate. Okay, Kat, you don't have to, Kate, honestly, but it's not like I named the company. They're not going to find this on the internet and be like, but in terms of the this week, I would like to, the reason I was asking all those questions about GUI and how you use this stuff to make an app is because I was going to see if it was possible to recreate. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Pit Crew. PICREW. It is a Japanese/Asian website where they host a lot of profile picture builders, like kind of like paper doll makers, but like specifically for avatars. And I wanted to see if it was possible to build one up like that if I provided all the graphics and just created the logic for clicking through and selecting options. But if it's going to be really difficult, I might have to downgrade my idea.
No, so I'm pulling it up now. It looks fascinating.
Those are like made by people with no coding experience in the most part. So I was like, what if I could do something like that, but I made it an app instead of an option you could click on a website?
Yeah, no, like just opening up, so it's hard to read because not only is it code that I'm not familiar with, it's also in another language.
Yeah, sorry, I have mine to auto translate, so mine
Oh.
automatically translates to English. So a lot of these are just really, I'll post one that is super popular with my friends right now. Hold on.
Like just scrolling through this website, even though I don't understand some of the anime language.
Well, actually, if you just click on the link that I just shared, that is what I'm trying to build, essentially. It's that one thing. Any one of those things, you click on them, it becomes this very small app that you run on your phone or your desktop, and you click through it, you hit the pink button, and you basically build your little creature.
So just building a small app is a progressive web app, and that's totally a thing that you could build a small app that does that. So progressive web apps are a very like well-described section of the internet of web pages. I love that little person that came up clicking on that link. But a progressive web app is something that you can install on a desktop or on a phone, but it's really just like a web page that gets run by workers that are by JavaScript workers in the browser. So like it's a completely browser-based thing that feels like it's an installed app. It's sort of an in-between land that the world is headed towards more and more.
So progressive web app is what I have to look into.
Yes, and there's definitely some quick tutorials to spin them up, but then building all the graphical pieces on top of it is its own game. But like, you know, having an image and some text and a few buttons, that, you know, that's reasonable. You can use Bootstrap for, like, Bootstrap is its own, like, a month to learn. Progressive web apps, you can find a tutorial where you can spin it up, where you can spin one up in an afternoon. But then, like, how do you go beyond that is going to be a much deeper road.
Okay.
So,
all right.
There's a ton of neat opportunity there. But like little installable apps is totally something you can figure out.
All right. And I guess that's with that, I'm done.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was trying to read it looks like the code that they have to run this page, and I'm sure that there's many pieces that are hidden behind some walls here or there, it's about 90 lines of code to run the web pages, which is interesting. So if you're on a page like that and you hit Control U or Command U on a Mac, you'll be able to see the code pop up that's underneath it. And yeah, the link that you sent ends at 98. So there can be a lot packed into just a few lines of code. So it doesn't mean that it's simple. But you know, it's not an outrageous amount of things. And I don't see, there's one CDN for Pick Crew. Yeah, maybe that. Oh, it looks like that might just be the actual image. Yeah, I think this could be not terrible.
Okay.
A lot of the things that are unintelligible on their page are really like ad trackers and like Google tracking what's going on.
Corey, can you share your screen for a second just to show?
Yeah, I sure can.
I guess I could have shared my screen as well because I'm looking at it too.
Either of you, anyone who can, yeah, that'd be.
Here we go. Okay, so let's see if I make cursor again. Here's the image that we're looking at. So this is the page. There's no scroll bar. It's just that one thing. But then if you hit Control U, this is what you get. And so it's view source : and then the URL. But this is it. So this is the first version of my colorful and so you can see that there's all sorts of things that are going on in here. There's do not sell or edit these images without my permission. Do not authorize to make NFTs of my artwork. There's, there's some amount of things that are hidden in here,
Yeah.
but it looks like this is JavaScript, CDN for something. A service name may be Fluct, F-L-U-C-T, and that's, being very careful about how we say that. And then here's secure pub ads. That looks like an ads thing, and page to add Google syndication. So you've got that, and then here's Pick Crew with content there. But rolling down through here, 98 lines of code and it's over.
Yeah.
This is where it looks like if we click on that, that might be the image. Oh, that's the loading image.
Yep.
So like you can click on those links and see different pieces and parts that pop up. It can be a helpful way to understand like how do web pages do things. Like if we go to create React app and do the same exact thing, React apps look really short for a bunch of reasons. This is actually bad, and this is short enough that it's a problem for them because it's not got good search engine optimization, SEOs, depending on how much you're into that internet search ad space information wormhole. This is not enough content for them to really be pinged by Google when you search for text. So they've actually started, yeah, but like there's all sorts of interesting things.
Corey, what's the difference between like inspect element and what you're doing here with the U?
Oh, Control U like shows the HTML code that was received by the thing. Whereas if I do the inspect tool, which is F12, now I've got this, and this is a little bit more like interactive, I would say. So in here, I can use this inspect tool to like highlight over things, and it'll show up inside of elements. So I can see that that's the hero title, which shows up over there on the right. These are the styles. So if I click on something like, if I do this and I inspect something specifically like that, I can go look at its styles. So this is like the CSS properties specifically for that thing, and then some other information. I can go over to the console. This is where JavaScript will sometimes spit out information. Like as I'm learning how to build those Tides websites, I use the console a lot. Sort of like serial print on Arduino, the console is a place to log out information as you're building stuff. So it can be really helpful. And then like network is an interesting one where if I hit refresh on this, this is how long it took to come back. So look at all these different crazy server things that happened. This is the waterfall chart of how that web app came back to me. If I do this here and function F12, I have a function key to get to my F12, and I hit refresh. Oh, look at all that time it took to load. This is not a great loading score. 500 milliseconds, 4.5 seconds. So all of this is like the delay that it took to load, which is fascinating.
It's absolutely like the inspect element has a lot of really cool stuff that I have to use for work actually.
Yeah, there's so many. And then like there's even differences between Google Chrome's inspect element versus the Firefox one. Like if you're trying to learn CSS grid, it'll show you the grid lines in Firefox, but it doesn't in Chrome. At least last I checked. Performance and memory, there's applications. Like you can store information in a browser and you can see what you've stored in this section. So if you're really building websites, the inspect tool is a great way to do a lot of work with it. But a really good use for it is also this, just to like toggle the device. Here's what it looks like on an iPhone 5. And so you can see it sort of jumps around and it looks different. What's iPhone X? That's what it would look like on an iPhone X, which is like a reasonable app. And then we've been looking at it on computers. So we can just head over to, I don't know, iPad Pro. You know, you can look at it with different perspectives. So as the world is building websites to fit on all screens, being responsive is a big part of that. And so being able to build responsive web pages like that and having an inspect tool where you can sort of imagine what it looks like on different screens is really important. Yeah, I think somebody put something in the chat, but I can't see it. Oh wait, there it is. Oh yeah, yeah. There's all these secret layers to the internet, for sure. Tons of stuff to look at. Let's see. Here's App Inventor. Let's see. Do we have examples, resources, blogs? App Inventor blog, create apps. Yeah, there's all sorts of different tools and tutorials and things. Oh, it's even got an app store app. If you wanted to get started with this, you totally could. This is like another interesting way to build apps to play around with. It might reasonably take more than just a week to figure out how to use App Inventor well. But there's some really cool resources. This is just their blog. Right? And even just a blog is a good example of how do you communicate information effectively through a website, right? A blog has got a background database where they pull all the information. The pages are pretty much built from content that you save somewhere else. And all that is good to go. There's lots of things.
Corey, if just for something like this, for like the App Inventor, would I be able to host the, like, quote unquote, I don't know if these are the correct words, host that app on GitHub? If it was like a progressive web app or something like that?
Yes, and so you could get a lot to happen there. I would need to like go into the nuts and the bolts of how that works, but Heroku could be a good place. I've definitely written things and stored them on GitHub, and then sort of spun them into Heroku to make it into something that you can, that's more interactive than like a GitHub pages would let you do. Real loud sound going on over there. But yeah, you can, if you're looking to host things, it's sometimes complicated to find the arrangement, but usually what I've done is I found a tutorial and then just gone for it. The way that I learned a lot of this is I just literally bought a book and followed the instructions. And then once I had followed the instructions, I went back and like saw how many of those things I could break in a controlled way and like learn from the process. Definitely circling back into the play realm, like follow instructions and question them as it's going to make sure that it's nice and clear.
What was the book, Corey?
Yeah. It was all about Python Flask. So I would need to look up, which is a way we're going to talk about Flask next week.
Okay.
It's a server application that's written in Python that will let you go from files on a computer to a real-time served website. So if someone says, I'd like to go to your website /party, it can serve them a specific page from that can build party information real time from a database. And so it's able to manage all those things, sort of like how Amazon, when you go to buy a new Slinky on Amazon, as one does weekly, I imagine, those pages for the new Slinky are built in the instant that you ask for them. They pull information from a database, like pictures about the Slinky, the price, the description, all the user reviews, all that is pulled together by a server somewhere. Probably not a Flask server because Flask is sort of smaller, but it's pulled together by a server from databases and then built into a page at the time that you ask for it. Instead of someone hard writing all, I mean, there's no way that anyone would write all those product pages and keep them updated. So Flask is one of many tools that can help you do that effectively in an automated way. That's sort of where we're headed, is that just that exists. If you wanted to get started, if you know JavaScript already and maybe you have dabbled in JavaScript, Node is another one that's really popular, node.js. And so that's another one that's good to check out. But again, that's what we're going to talk about next week. The things that servers do is where we're headed. So we talked a little bit more about the physical side of them, and next week is more the things that they do, the ways that you make them do that. So that's the like long-term and somewhat complicated goal. Again, this is one that gets really deep, so we're good. In terms of broader planning, this was gonna be our bio week, but we got bumped around. MakeHaven has to sign up and register a few places to buy the biology things. We have to get registered as a buyer from these biology retailers. So we're some logistics there. we're buying some time. And then we're also thinking about composites, which is why my project is headed in the direction that it is, so that we can, this is definitely intended to have a composite layup over top of it. So those are all directions that we're headed. We're going to work on these skills, but both of those need a little bit of lead time. So we're doing this two sort of technical weeks, and then we'll hop back into bio and composites, which are like 2 units of 1 week units. And then after that might be user experiences. And then we're on to group projects, which is very close, like getting towards the end. The group projects are going to be about building machines. So yeah, that I think that covers our full circle. Does anybody have any more questions, or should we turn off the recording and just chat about life and how glad we are that the sun is staying up longer and the vaccines are coming?